You know, we're talking about relational maturity. Like, really, we call it pressure points. But it really is, how do we become more relationally mature? Honestly, sometimes you can be aware that sometimes the way we deal with conflict hasn't matured as much as some other things in us has matured. You know what I mean? We can have emotional reactions like we had when we were younger. And we can have hurts we're still carrying from our long ago. So it's like, how do we mature? How do we become more like Christ? So we're going to look at this. What I'm entitling today's message is Stopping the Blame Game. I was going to entitle it, You're Not as Right as You Think. Either one would work, but it really is, there is a way we can get stuck in our relationships, whether it's at church, when you're small group, or whether it's at home, or at work, or with friends. We can get stuck in some cycles that don't work. Now, when I was a young pastor, which was a long time ago, I was really shocked many times in dealing with people because I just didn't know what I didn't know, and I had a lot to learn. And I remember one of the times that I was really shocked, and it was when this lady came in to see me. Her and her family came to our church, and she wanted to share some challenges that she was having in her marriage. So she talked about that, and as she talked, I was like, if my mouth didn't drop open, I was thinking that. It's like, gosh, I know your husband. I didn't realize he was so bad. And I was listening to, like, he sounded selfish and mean-spirited and unkind, and I was concerned for them. They were faithful members of our church, so I said, well, let me call him and set up a time to meet with him. And, you know, they sounded like this is in serious trouble. So he came the next week, and I saw him, and when he came in, he was a kind, warm man, but he told a very different story than she had told me. In fact, she had left out a lot of stuff. She didn't say some of the mean stuff that she said to him. And I'm starting to listen to them and realize their conversation is so one-sided. He has his view of how he's right and she's wrong. She has her view of how she's right and he's wrong. And they're in this cycle of blaming each other, and they're never going to solve a problem. They're never going to be able to come together, and it's going to just leave tension. And even this subject matter that they were having this cycle about is going to stay there as an unresolved issue that's like a landmine ready to go off anytime you come near it. Are you with me? She saw herself as, I'm 100% right. So she felt justified to not be loving to him. So she had harsh words. She's nagging, griping, fussing at him. And she felt right to do that because she's right and he's wrong. And he felt 100% he was right and she was wrong because he knew his points. He had good, solid points. They were valid. And he looked at her flaws. So he was justified. And here's the point. Go ahead and put that up. Neither one of them was nearly as right as they thought. They weren't even close to as right as they thought. They both were stuck in the blame game. They were seeing their one side and not the other side, and they were feeling justified to be unloving. So they're holding unloving thoughts and feelings, even though as Christians, we're called to love. I mean, it tells us to love our enemies, to bless those who curse us, to turn the other cheek, to forgive 70 times 7. They weren't doing anything like that, and they didn't feel the slightest bit conviction. Because why? I'm right, they're wrong. The problem with the blame game is both of them had some points, and they did have some right, but they were very wrong in many other ways, and they could not see it. They couldn't hear it in their tones or their attitudes or their focus. All they were focused on is how they have built a case of how they're right and the other person is wrong. And so nobody was listening to each other. Nobody was really trying to hear what God was saying about the matter. They both were just convinced, you're the one that needs to change. Now, let's be honest. I've been stuck in the blame game many, many, many times. And all of us have. It's a human tendency to look at it from one of the things I've learned in working with people is that we all have a way we tell a story to ourselves about the situation. And we're usually the good guy who did all this right. I did this, I sacrificed for them, I did all that, and they didn't do anything for me. And they did that wrong, and they did that wrong. That's the way selfish, sinful human nature looks at stuff. I'm right. And we don't put in all what we do, like the bad stuff, the negative stuff. We just put in the right that we did, and we put in the wrong that they did. And I've done that. And because I could put words to my thought or feelings, I really believed that my points were what was missing from this problem being solved. And if whoever I was dealing with, if they would just listen to me, we could solve this problem. So I would think of other ways to say it. You hear me now? Maybe if I say it this way, that'll help. Maybe if I come in with this nice, soft comment in the beginning. Maybe if I say this. But what I'm really believing, I'm right, and if you'll just listen to me, this whole thing can be solved. You see, we all get stuck in the blame game, and here's what we need to understand. The blame game is a relational struggle that is a weapon that brings destruction. It causes deep wounds, and it solves no problems. In fact, many of you have cycles of conversations that have gone on for years, and nothing has ever changed. And you're blaming them for the reason nothing has changed, instead of blaming the blame game. The blame game will never work. It'll never solve a problem. And what's surprising about this, at least to me, is Jesus talked about this a lot. He told us how getting stuck in our rightness is ugly and unproductive. And it is not blessed by God. Now, Jesus hung around, or people surrounded Jesus that thought they were right and others were wrong. They thought they had the right ideas on most issues, and they would judge anyone that did not see things the way they did as wrong. And they would feel justified to look down on them because they're wrong, to speak against them because they're wrong, to not love them because they are wrong. These people were called the Pharisees. And Jesus said this to them in Luke chapter 18, starting at verse 9. To some who are confident of their own rightness, righteousness, and look down on everyone else. Woo, that sounds familiar. Jesus told this parable. 2 men went into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee, the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like these other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of all that I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but he beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. One guy says, I'm righteous, and the other guy, by even societal standards, was unrighteous. He was not right. He's a tax collector. That is a traitor to a Jew. You've joined with Rome to oppress us. The religious leader saw himself as right, and because he saw himself that way, because whenever you tell yourself, I'm right, you're wrong, you begin to elevate yourself in your mind. You begin to build your one-sided case of all that you've done and all they've not done. And you get puffed up. And Jesus is showing them it's not just about right and wrong, it's also about pride and humility. And he said this again and again. See, the blame game is rising up in pride. It's beginning to become proud, like I'm right. That's what the whole building of your case is. It's pride. And they're sitting there, but proud people don't love well at all. Proud people don't hear well because they're full of their own stuff. Proud people don't follow God because they're focused on themselves instead of loving or finding solutions, and they're very wrong because of that. And it's so easy to fall into spiritual pride and to develop a one-sided view because the argument's inside of me and I can build my case. I can whitewash the things that I've done wrong. I can act like they're not there. I can build a case. And I'm looking at it from my angle. And I've often found when you really hear someone, they have another angle, and you didn't factor in those things when you were building your case. So whenever we begin to think, I'm right, you're wrong, then I feel justified to be unloving, like harsh. Like people will go, I've told you for 3 days to clean the kitchen and you haven't, so now I'm justified to not speak to you the rest of the day. People do that. I mean, they do stuff. Why are you justified? Because you didn't clean the kitchen. Really, we're going to do that. And you realize that that's what we do. That we make it justified. Now I can be angry. Now I can be harsh. Now I can nag you until I grind you into the ground. Now I can begin to walk around like I'm great and you're not. Now I can withhold love. When you start to think like that, it's so dangerous. Because when you hold on to offense long enough, it settles into your heart. And offense becomes contempt, where we begin to hold on to judgments. And whenever you hold on to a judgment, you begin to get hate in your heart. You really do begin to get a hateful attitude. And you begin to feel justified to hate. And so you realize that these are places now the enemy's got a foothold. So you realize that whenever we focus on our rightness without humility, we are wrong. And Jesus said it to us again and again because we are nothing like him when we do that. Matthew 7 says it this way, judge not. I mean, he tells us don't judge. Don't go into contempt. Don't go into building your case or you're going to be judged. And he's saying, for with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. Or with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. I realized one time years ago that I wanted mercy for me, but justice for a few other people. You know what I'm saying? Lord, let them experience the pain of what they've been doing. I never prayed like David for houses to be on their heads and all that kind of stuff. But you realize how self-centered it is to want mercy for me. I mean, God has been merciful to me. He's been patient with me. He has literally rescued me more times than I can count. He has been gracious and kind and forgiving and redemptive for me. And now I don't want to give that to somebody else. He told stories about that. It says in Ephesians chapter 4, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you've received. Be completely, say completely, humble and gentle, and be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. The call of God is for us to be humble with each other because we all need patience and forbearance and gentleness and all of those things. We need that from God. We need it for each other, and all of that requires humility. And as soon as we start going in the blame game, we leave humility, and we go into building the case of how we're right and they're wrong. The Pharisee was right, and he looked down on the others. He's up here, they're down there. But he doesn't realize what makes it completely invalid is all of us are sinners. In God's eyes, there's none of us up here and some of us down there. We're all wretched. Our hearts are deceitfully wicked. Not one of us is righteous. No, not one. So we all come to him with humility. Jesus was not concerned with just right and wrong. He was also concerned with pride and humility. Please hear that. The tone, the approach, the heart behind our words matters just as much. Sometimes we're fighting for our rightness in a tone that is haughty, unloving, aggressive, hurtful. See, the blame game is a dysfunctional, unhealthy relational pattern that we need to leave behind. So the question I ask is, what causes us to engage in this? What causes us to start getting into this kind of dysfunctional cycle? The first thing is people why do we play this? Because people choose not to love when others are not right. People choose not to love when others are not right. We have a switch in us. Soon as we have validated them as not right, now I don't have to love them. That's not of Jesus. Jesus called the Pharisees hypocrites, not because they had wrongs in their life. All of us do. He called them hypocrites because they thought they were up here and everybody else was down here. And see, when you go into the blame game, you go into pride, the pride that they had. Some of us, we go into the pride of pity. We're a victim. We're being mistreated. We are wrongly done. And we're justified to hold on to our hurt because of these terrible people, what they're doing to us. Others of us go into the pride of arrogance. If people would just listen to me, I could fix this problem. If they would just do what I said, we wouldn't have this difficulty that we have here. Some go into the pride of pity. Some go into the pride of arrogance. But once pride gets in, it drives us to a one-sided view where we justify being unloving and unkind. And the Bible clearly says, God opposes the proud. Pride brings destruction. It doesn't bring a solution. 1 Peter says, clothe yourself, all of you, with humility towards one another. For God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Nothing good comes when we start building our case against people. For we often forget that our highest priority, our highest calling is to love God and love one another. Everything hangs on those two things. That's the reason I've said again and again, that's the reason I pray into it every day, because every day things come to want to affect my trust in God and shut my heart down towards loving people and to take you into a place that's negative, defensive, critical, judgmental. Jesus showed us, love people even when they're not right. Like tax collectors, like prostitutes, like sinners, like you, like me. He loved us even when we weren't right. Even when we were very much off track. Look at what Jesus said to his disciples in John chapter 13. Now you got to get the context of when he's saying these words, because that matters. So this is nearing, they're having the communion, the Lord's Supper here in this chapter. He's nearing his death, and he's meeting with them. Now look at this. Now, verse 1, before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During the supper, when the devil had already put in the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. Now, Jesus at this dinner said he loved them till the end. But there was a lot not right going on at this dinner. And he's still loving them. He even, in fact, became like a bondservant and washed their feet. Now, what was not right? Judas was going to betray him. That could set a few of us off. We don't come to that dinner with much joy in our heart. He's already told Peter he's going to deny him not long after the dinner's over. And he already told the rest of the disciples that they were going to be scattered and run and leave him hanging on the cross by himself. And they're arguing over who's the greatest. Can you imagine how absurd that was to him? They're got all of this not right going on. They're arguing about position, and he's washing their feet. You see, he's saying, I'm calling you. And then he goes down that chapter a little bit longer. He comes to this where he says, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another just as I have loved you. There is a lot not right here, but I'm going to love you. Because love redeems, love restores, love transforms. And then he tells them, just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you're my disciples, if you love one another. Love is given to you, but we must choose to give it to other people. Here's the thing. A lot of times when you think about letting go of an offense, loving someone when they're not right, you think they don't deserve it, or you think they won't appreciate it, or you think they're just going to trample me if I love them. and they're just going to take advantage of me. But here's the reason you do it. Not because they deserve it, not because they'll appreciate it. You do it because you love him. Hear me. I love you, Jesus. And that begins to allow you to be involved in this situation. That allows your love to flow freely in me instead of me holding on to an offense and rising up in pride. He's saying, I want you to love them because I've loved you. In 1 Corinthians 13, it says, if I speak in the tongue of men and angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong and a clanging cymbal. If I have all the prophetic power and understand all the mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have the faith that can remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver my body to be burned, but have not love, I gained nothing. Do you see how important the Bible is saying love is? To go in and saying, I'm right, and to have no love, you gain nothing. You accomplish nothing. It doesn't matter how right you think you are. Without love, it is nothing. Amen. He goes on. Love is patient, kind. It does not envy or boast. It's not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It's not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. You cannot rise in pride and walk in love at the same time. Love conquers. Mercy triumphs, but pride destroys, and it does damage. So we need to stop focusing on ourselves in the case we're building against somebody. And we need to focus on the Lord and gaining a position of love so that God can begin to bring healing where there needs to be healing, change where there needs to be change, understanding where there needs to be understanding. Amen. Also, what causes us to go into this blame game? The second thing is people focus on others' flaws and lose sight of their own. When you and I are building cases against people and rising up in our rightness, we have a one-sided view and we justify thoughts and feelings that are not of God. They're harsh, they're unloving, they're unkind, they're not gentle, all of that. And Jesus said, before you go to talk to that person, to talk about that person, to build your arguments against them, to make your points, you need to come to me. And let me help position you in humility before you address the problem. If you don't do that, you're going to approach that person in pride, and you will be blind, and the situation will only get worse. Anybody ever been there? All the time. And if we don't stop, we just keep throwing fuel on a fire. Jesus said it this way, Matthew 7, verse 3. Why do you see the speck that's in your brother's eye, but you do not notice the log that's in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, hey, let me help you out here. Let me take that speck out of your eye, when there is a log in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your eye, then you'll see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Many times you don't even know when you're building a case that you even got a log in your eye because you feel so right. And you've convinced yourself thoroughly they're so wrong. But when you go before the Lord and you know He knows everything, there's no pulling the wool over, there's no one-siding the story with Him. And you start going to Him, humbling yourself and saying, God, I don't want my ways because my ways bring destruction. I don't want to resist you because you're the only one that can bring healing where there is not healing right now. I don't want to rise up in my pride because you will oppose me and nothing good will come from this. I want to see what you see. I want to walk in the truth that you have. When you begin to humble yourself and the Lord starts reminding you how patient and gracious he's been with you, he takes you back to one of your darker moments in life and how when you turned to him, he was there and lifted you up. All of a sudden, your heart gets flooded with gratitude because you realize, God, you were so good to me. I didn't deserve that. Or you remember how he's told you for 3 years to do something and you didn't do it and you kept putting it off. And then you realize how patient he's been, that he didn't walk away, he didn't leave you. You were about to give up on yourself, but he didn't give up on you. Then all of a sudden, when you look at that other person, you realize, I need to give them some patience too. The whole perspective changes. Now, I want to give you kind of a picture of this. A lot of us, when we get into the place that we're saying, I'm right, and we build a case because that's the way it works. Pride, we're looking at it one-sided. We've done all this. We've cared for them. We've helped them. We've served them. We were patient with them. We did all of this. And then we list all that they don't do, all that we have against them. That's the way it works. When we begin to sit in that position, it goes that we start feeling morally superior. Like we're up here. We're the one that's holding this whole thing together. We're the one that's paying the price. We're the one that's done this or done that. And we begin to feel justified to look down on them, to make them less than. And when we do that, we begin to become judgmental. And we start holding things against them. We start speaking or thinking against them. And when you get judgmental for long, it begins to lead you to a place that you one-side the argument and you have unloving thoughts, attitudes, and even reactions inside of you. And so you start acting very unlike Jesus in that situation. And it only gets worse. Amen. That's not at all what Jesus called us to do. I want you to think about Jesus for a minute. Jesus was the most right of anybody because he was sinless. He was without sin. So he is the most righteous, but he is also the least judgmental. He loved people no matter where they were. Think about the woman caught in adultery. The religious leaders brought her to Jesus because they wanted to put him in a tight spot. And she was wrong, totally wrong. And they were right. This was a sin. But Jesus said to them, all right, I want any of you that's never sinned to cast the first stone. He's saying, you have the right to judge her if you're sinless. And he's calling them to humble themselves before they rise up in judgment. He's calling them to remember, none of you have the right to throw the stone because all of you have been given much mercy and grace from God. The thing that strikes me, the only one that had the right to judge her was Jesus. And he looked at the woman and said, where are your accusers? And she said, they've left. And he said, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. How powerful is that? Love met her wrong. And I guarantee you, because love's met me and you a time or two, and it pierces through all the hopelessness, the despair, the fears, and it transforms something inside. When we go to God in humility and we start wanting him to deal with the log, and the log many times, friend, is our judgment, our pride, our victim mentality, our pity parties, our making it about ourselves, our arrogance, our thinking, everybody just listen to me. You only see in part. You don't see the whole thing. We make assumptions on people's motives, their intents. We sit here and think we are God. We're not God. And if we begin to humble ourselves, we go to the next one. When we begin to realize how much we've been forgiven, how patient, how gracious God has been for us, go ahead. We begin to feel profoundly humble. We begin to feel profoundly thankful. God, you have been good to me. God, you've not given up on me. God, you have carried me through battle after battle after battle, even though sometimes I'm slow to learn, even though sometimes I'm slow to bow my knee, but you have met me through this, walked me through that, and your heart changes from the pride that you were in. And then you begin to feel his mercy. And this is the goodness that he's given to you, which begins to lead you to have an overwhelming flow of love to deal with whatever problem you've got going on there. I mean, it's a whole different conversation when you do this than when you do the other. Put them both up there. It's a completely different conversation. Our hearts are where we begin to bring them to God. And I say this because I'm saying, if we know, God, I know my relationship needs your help, but I don't know how to stop reacting. I don't know how to stop running my mouth when I'm angry. I don't know how to stop putting a wall up, because those are real things that we can feel. I don't know how to deal with that. Then that's where your first place you humble yourself is with God. And here's what you say. I don't know how to change that, but I want you to. I want you to do this in me. I want you to have your way in me. And he can begin to do what you've not been able to do. And we start, some of us will know there are offenses that I'm holding. There's contempt that I'm letting in my heart. There is case building that I need to let go today. I need to ask God to cleanse my heart of that. And that this morning we're saying, God, do what you need to do in me. Because I want to stop this dysfunctional cycle that's destroying and harming my relationship.